So in this tutorial, we're going to start a basic HTML and CSS project. Very simple, very basic, and I'm going to walk through the tools and things that I use to get projects up and running. The first tool that I use is Visual Studio Code. And you can go up here and type in your browser and type in code.visualstudio.com. I will be honest, there's some that still use Notepad++ or Dreamweaver from Adobe. But I will honestly say that most industry professionals use Visual Studio Code. One, it's free, it's very versatile, and you can download a lot of extensions and make it work. My next favorite, however, is paid for. It used to be PHP Storm by JetBrains. It's a great tool. It's just a lot of people had to pay for it, and it just wasn't feasible. So this is a great tool to use. So go ahead and download that for whatever operating system you're on, and let's get started. Now that I have Visual Studio Code downloaded, as you can see, we are up and running. This is what we should come up to. We have a welcome screen. We have a bunch of icons over here on your left. Some of those are because I do have extensions installed. Others that you won't have. For instance, like this project manager. You're probably not going to have all these projects in here unless you've already been using Visual Studio Code. So how do we set up a project for just a basic HTML and CSS if you're just now learning? I like to stay very organized. So I'm going to open up a Finder window on a Mac. If you're on a PC, those are called Windows Explorer, I believe. I'm not sure if they're going to change the name as they move forward, or an Explorer window. So you'll know what I mean as we move forward, but it's just the browsing window where you can view all your folders. When you're in web development, make sure that you stay very organized. It's very important that you're organized. I'm going to open up my Finder window. I went into my dev workspace. I'm going to go into tutorials, and I'm going to create a folder that's just going to be called HTML CSS Starter. And this is going to be my base project folder. Now we could create more inside of there. That's totally up to you. But we're going to start here for these next few tutorials. Once we have that folder, I'm just going to drag that down to Visual Studio Code. You can drop it right in the window and notice that it opens up. If you are going to put more projects in this folder, for instance, like, starting course, and notice how I'm not using any uppercase or any spaces. In web development, we do not use uppercase or spaces when we first start. There are times when we use spaces or, for instance, uppercase letters. When I always start students or individuals out in HTML, I always get them used to starting everything with lowercase, because most of the time, I'd probably say 85% of the time, everything is lowercase and no spaces. So if you're creating a new project that's inside of a higher parent, drag the child project down into Visual Studio Code. Do not drag the overall parent in there. Now, some people like to do that, but I think it gets very confusing to beginners because now you have all of these files and folders and everything over there, and it can get very, very cluttered in your Explorer area in Visual Studio Code. So don't do that. Keep it very simple. I'm going to get rid of this project. So now we come back over here in our Explorer, and we do not have any folders. It looks very clean. So to start a new HTML and CSS project, I always start with three things. We have two folders and one file. In the first folder, we are going to call this CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And this is the file or the folder that's going to hold the file. This is going to style our entire HTML page to where it looks good and people want to look at it, really. If you just put HTML on a page, it's just basically text. The next thing we want to add in here, and notice that I'm not highlighting that CSS, I clicked off of it. I want to add one for images. So now that we have images, and we're going to add those later as we get going, the next final thing for now is our index.html. Now, notice as soon as you type index.html, the HTML is an extension, so that's naming the actual file type. It opens up that file over here. Now, don't get started, coding that out. I'm going to show you some pretty cool shortcuts. But for now, just know that index is always basically your home page in a web project. So don't name this home, don't name this anything else like home page. Index is always the name of the home page. If you ever go to like google.com or anything that's just a name without a file extension, normally it pulls up an index.html. And we'll explain that more as we get going throughout all of these tutorials. Okay, now to scaffold this out, and that's usually what it's called in development. To scaffold it out means to basically create the entire structure or a structure of something. I'm going to put an exclamation point. In Visual Studio Code have these nice emits tools in here that allow us to scaffold this out. So I'm just going to put an exclamation point, and you can hit tab or enter, either one. Mine's a little wide because my screen is a little shorter, but I'm going to change my font size real quick. I didn't want to hit that button. I'm going to go down here to settings, and if you want to change your stuff, you can. Now I'm using a theme called Oceanic Next, and it's a dimmer theme. You can change your themes by going into this little gear down here. Okay, and then there's color themes here, and you can download a lot, browse a lot, do whatever. But we're going to go to settings right now. I'm just going to get my font down to something that we can actually see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm just going to save that real quick. Let's go over and look and see if it's a little bit nicer in here. It does fit a little bit better. I'm going to leave it a little bit bigger so we can actually see or help you see that. So we'll go to 14. I think that'll work. Let's go over and take a look. Yeah, that looks a lot better on the screen. All right, so now we're down to 14. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to change some of these settings real quick, just to change your environment. Like I mentioned, color theme. I use Oceanic Next dimmed background. Okay, you can choose all of these different kinds that you want. These are dark themes, light themes. It's totally up to you. Now, I do use a lot of extensions. And if you want to add extensions, there are a few that's very important to use. If we come over here to this little 4 boxes that break out, there's a lot of extensions that you can search. Now, these extensions have either been made by Microsoft, who made Visual Studio Code, or other developers. And those other developers their name is posted underneath here. There's a few that we're going to get started off with. And I'm going to paste those right here so we can see those. So what extensions do I use? I'm going to post these right here so we can see it, and you guys can start adding them as we start going through. Now, you do not need all of these, but you can write them down if you want to remember them. The first one we're going to do is auto close tag, and all you do is type that over here in the extension, auto close tag. Okay. And when you click on it, it opens it up over here, and this is what it should look like. It shows who made it. It's been downloaded a lot of times, and if you scroll down through the page, it will actually show you what it's actually doing. So notice that when you open a tag or start to write it, it automatically closes it for you, and that's very important in HTML when you're developing some of the elements. So as we go back through here, the next one is going to be auto name tag. So you just keep searching these names that I have here. Auto close tag will close it, like I mentioned. Rename, if you rename the opening tag or the closing tag, it renames both. Paste and indent, path IntelliSense, that basically helps Visual Studio Code know the paths that are inside of your project. Prettier is very important. This is how our code is formatted. So whenever you hit save, that's very important. It formats your codes to help you look at it and understand where an opening and closing tags are, how to add content, and that kind of thing. The next is live server. This is also very important. This is how Visual Studio Code is going to allow us to view our web pages, and it opens up a virtual server on our machine that simulates a web hosting service. This down here is a key map. I came from PHP Storm. It has a few little keyboard shortcuts in it that I really like, and that's the reason why I add this extension. HTML snippets is an optional one, but you can download that extension if you want. So go ahead and take the time, pause this video, and add all of these different extensions to Visual Studio Code. They'll all help you out. Now that you have all those extensions enclosed, we can go back to our Explorer window and finish setting up our project. So we have a CSS file folder, we have an images folder, and we have an index.html file. Remember, we just typed in an exclamation point and hit tab. Now, one thing that was kind of neat about that is when you do that, it scaffolds it out, but if you notice, it puts our cursor down here to places it thinks that we want to change. For right now, we're going to leave the device width to the same, and all you have to do is hit tab and it takes you to the initial scale. That's the next thing it thinks you want to change. If you hit tab again, it takes us to our title of our page, and this is what goes into the tab of our browser. So if we look up at the top, and I'm going to go over to Chrome here real quick. If we look up here, this Visual Studio Code, you won't see it on the page, but it's in the browser tab. That is what this title is. So we're going to call this HTML CSS Starter. Now that you have that, we're ready to link our style sheet and get going on creating, a new styling file. In order to do that, we're going to come over to CSS folder. And notice I'm staying very organized. A lot of people just put all their files out here. A good developer does not do that. Okay, so we're going to put this in our CSS folder. I'm going to create a new file. This first one is a new file, the second one is a new folder, and the rest of these just are refresh and collapse. Okay, I'm going to add a new file inside of that. Notice I had that highlighted. I'm going to call this styles.css. And notice that it opens it up automatically. Now, unfortunately, right now I don't have any extensions and I didn't find one that I liked, but there's really no good snippets for the CSS that I want. Now that I have that created, I'm going to link that. This is called an external style sheet. This is going to be the most common way developers style their web pages. Used to, there was an embedded. You might still see that every once in a while. And long ago, we had inline styling, and that's when you actually wrote styling inside the tag. That was very hard to do, especially if you had hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, a lot of pages are dynamically generated, so most of them need that external style sheet. And in order to attach that style sheet, we're just going to type in the word link. Now, I always believe in keyboard shortcuts and snippets. It helps you write code, and it also helps misspellings. Now, once you type the word link, you can hit tab, and it auto prints that out and put your cursor right to the href, which is the path to the file. We're going to type in CSS, and then notice that that IntelliSense extension finds that file and knows where it's at, and we can actually input it there. Now I want to explain the directory and the level. So our index file is on the same level as images and CSS. So notice that you can see all of them. But when we open up CSS, our style sheet is inside of this folder. It's very important to understand how this hierarchy of files go and know where you're always at, because there's sometimes you're going to have to back out of folders for these paths in order to get to images, especially if you're putting images in your style sheet. So notice that I was able to put CSS because our index and CSS folder are on the same level. I was able just to write CSS, and then the / goes into that folder, and then we're able to write CSS, our styles.css. And now we have attached our CSS file. So that's the basic overview of how you would start a very basic HTML and CSS project. So make sure that you have all of that set up, make sure that you have your extensions set up, and in the next tutorial, we're going to get you started learning how to make a website.